The next to do on our list is the base plan, so making the client's plan adjustable. And as you will just see in a minute when we head over to the Excel file, is that there's already everything included from balancing the balance sheet and handling special line items. So what I will do now is I will make a rather short video that goes over the base plan, base and management case and the checks. So I will keep this rather short as this is just about pointing out the structure, and then we will spend quite some more time on balancing the balance sheet and handling those special line items. So let's have a look at the B and PB tabs. The idea of the B tab is to read in the client's actuals and plan from the interface that we just built, and to make it adjustable. So here we have the values from the interface, here our line for writing in our plan values, and here the final version of sales in this case. And I will just show you what the idea here is technically. So as you can see here, for the interface value, we just do a lookup on the EIF AP tab, so what we just built. Then next we have this plan line, in which you can see here there's just nothing. So this is an opportunity to enter a value. Well, in fact, for the plan period, so not for the actuals. And this is also what I'm handling here. So I'm checking if that date, January 21st, 2021 in this case, is before the starting date of the integration or of the planning. And if that's the case, I will always go with the interface value because it doesn't make sense to put in a plan value. However, if that's not the case, so if we are already in the plan or forecast horizon, then we need to check if there is a value provided in here in the plan cell. And well, if this cell is empty, which means that we didn't want to override the interface value, then we just go with the interface value. However, if there is something in here, we will just go with that value. So I could just type in, I don't know, well, not here because these are actuals, but let's move to the very end. Let's type in 1000, and here this would just switch. I will turn this back and head over right back here. And well, when I entered something here, this just wouldn't change the sales value because that doesn't make sense as these are actuals. This works like this for all of the line items, so there's always this interface and plan input. Then we have the final line item that is derived with the formula that I just showed to you. And this makes the whole thing adjustable also down here in the balance sheet. So let's see what else we got in here. When we look on the left-hand side, so for the annual values, you can see that here I'm just using the same formula as I used in the setup tab to aggregate this for the income statement. And down here in the balance sheet, you will see that, well, this is just an index match lookup. Other than that, well, interface and plan, I just use hard plugs for this as it's really not about to change. The line items value I look up based on the ID in the setup tab. Also note here that we have now a second ID tab, and here I put this O at the end for output. The reason for that is that, well, here I'm using this ID to read this in from the interface, but this is actually the value that we want to for the process after this B tab. And to make sure that I get this in the next tab, I'm using this ID, so output, so it's unique and not like this. So as you can see here on the PB tab, I'm reading those in based on this ID with the O at the end. But for example here, I'm again just using these to get the line item names. Now the PB tab really is just a view of the B tab that doesn't contain the interface and plan lines. It contains just as the B tab the working capital stuff and the balancing. In fact, I wouldn't need this on this tab because as this is just a look at the B tab, it's not required that I calculate these things here again. So the working capital and the balancing, I included it nonetheless because this is kind of the blueprint layout that we will also use when we provide views on the base and management cases over here. So let us now have a look at that base and management case. How do we set up these measure and case templates? The measure templates, as for example here for the first measure for the base case, all come in the same format. And as you can see over here, well, there's a lot of empty space because here we could just enter our values. Like for example here, I just typed in some numbers to test the model, but this would, well, in fact reduce salaries by 12k. Remember that salaries are a cost item, so these salaries come with a negative sign. And if they come with a positive sign, that's actually not salaries that we pay, but salaries that we kind of get. So actually this is a reduction of salaries, and that's why it's included in that here like that. When you scroll down a bit, and it's also something you can see here in those red lines, there's some stuff missing. So here we don't have any working capital stuff, we don't have the balancing part, and the reason for that is it doesn't make sense to include these things on the measures tabs. We will have these over here on the final view of the base case in this case. So here you can see there are formulas in those red lines, and here comes the working capital and the balancing fully blown. But we do not include it here, and also not here on the BC tab. The BC tab is just, well, the sum of those three tabs, so the individual measures. So you can see that here, it's not doing nothing but summing these up. This is a way to express in Excel. Well, we have this tab, and we have this tab, and we want to sum up everything in between in cell N11, so just in that cell. This is really useful because, say for example, that I move this tab over here in between those tabs, this would just automatically account for this. Now, if you wonder why it's the case that we shouldn't do this working capital and balancing stuff in here, the reason for that is when you think of income taxes, for example. Let's say in this measure we had additional sales of 1 million. Now, this would imply that we would have to pay taxes on this 1 million because other than that, if nothing else is happening here, we would get an EBT, earnings before taxes, of 1 million. So we would have to pay income taxes on this. But this doesn't make sense as it's not the full picture kind of. So the entire case is depending on a lot of other things. And it may just be the case that we are having negative EBT, which would mean that we do not pay taxes for that financial year at all. So this is just the reason why it doesn't make sense to calculate taxes, for example, or also not the balancing related items like interests, for example, here on these measure tabs. So these measure tabs all come in the same format. Then we have the BC tab that is summing up the measures. And then we have the case as such, which is the sum of the base plan and the BC tab, so the measures from that base case here. The same thing just for the management case as well. So here we have the MC tabs. I also put in some, well, test values. This is just the sum of these MC tabs. This here then is the base case plus the management case measures. And the reason why I can do it like this here is because this is not affected by the integration stuff. So for example here, the interest income, I need to recalculate this here again. So if we are in the planning horizon that is after or on the integration starting date, well then for the interest income, for example, I get on here to cash and equivalents, and I multiply this with the interest rate for this, which is per annum, so I need to divide this by 12. And only if we are before the integration start, which is the case, by the way, for this date, of course, well, then I'm looking up what we have in the base case plus the management case measures. So this is the reason why I can do it up here like this, because this is not affected by the integration, working capital, balancing, and so on. And if we go back to the base case tab, you can just see that here as well. So here, this is the sum of the base plan plus the base case measures. And down here for these items in red, what I'm doing is I'm checking if we are already in the planning horizon. And if that is the case, then I calculate this value, interest income in this case, from scratch. If we are in the actuals, well, then I'm just getting the value from the base plan plus what we have in the base case measures. Here, well aware that we shouldn't have any base case measures for the past, so for the actuals, which effectively means that this just gives me the base plan value. So now that we've had a look at all these measure tabs, here's also an overview for the different plans and cases. So this starts on the left-hand side with the base plan. Then we have the base case measures, which gives us the base case if we sum these up. If we then add to the base case the management case measures, well, we get the management case. Now let me highlight one thing in terms of the base case measures and management case measures here on this tab. So initially I thought, well, hell, let's just sum up what we get for the base case measures in here to populate this cell, for example. But it turned out that's not a good idea and it's not working for some of the line items. And the reason for that is, well, if we go down here, you will see, for example, these interests items, so income and expenses. And, well, as I mentioned, we cannot calculate them separately on the measure tabs. So here we would just have zeros for these. So here what I'm doing is that I'm, well, taking the final base case, which is integrated. And then from this, I'm subtracting the value from the base plan. And then this just gives me the real delta. So I wouldn't get this real delta by, well, just summing up the base case measures, as for example, there wouldn't be any interest income in there. For sales, for example, this would still work, but as I want to make my formulas consistent, I also do it up here like this. And the same just for the management case. So the idea here also is just to calculate the delta between the management case and the base case, which is particularly important, for example, down here, and not just sum up those management case measures. So now we've made it to the final to-do in the first phase. Let's have a look at the checks to monitor the model's behavior. So in terms of the model, I will just skip this out section here. We will take care of that at the very end of this video section. So let's move on to the checks. As I already shortly mentioned, I'm always getting these from cell A2 to get an overview here. And, well, for the most part, I can show you what I'm doing in the setup tab, for example. I'm just checking if assets and liabilities and equity equal. I think that's really the main check here in this model. There are some more checks, for example, here on this P-All tab. Just to give you an idea of this, here what I'm doing is, well, the usual assets equal liabilities and equity check. And then here as a second step, well, as these are equal, I just have to check for one of them if they match against the source. As in the source, I'm also doing this kind of assets equals liabilities and equity check. So here I'm checking this against the PB tab, base plan. When I move over here this doesn't make sense because I don't do the integration on these measure tabs. Then here the same thing for the base case again. So I'm checking against the source and also here for the management case. And then, well, I aggregate this as usual with the absolute values to make sure nothing cancels out. Add this up here, and that's it for the most part. And one of the reasons why this makes sense is, as you can see here in the balance sheet, I'm calculating the total assets vertically. So I'm not looking them up from the source or something like that. Well, these values, these I looked up, But here, this is what the sum of these, and this is the sum of these, and so on. So this is just a cross-reference really to make sure that, well, what I calculate here vertically is in line with what's in the source as a total in the end, which is something that is kind of the key idea of checks. So usually you calculate something horizontally and vertically, and then you check if it's still the same, or you break things apart and build them together again and check if it's still the same.